Thank you all very much for this opportunity to present here today. My talk is around loneliness, a public health perspective. So my presentation is in two parts: understanding loneliness and why definitions matter. And then I'll cover some of the social and demographic characteristics associated with loneliness in Northern Ireland. For me, it's important to understand an issue like loneliness and understand how to address it, whether this is at a personal level, a community level, a structural level, or a policy level. So definitions really matter. So loneliness is a negative emotional feeling. It's the outcome of the difference between one's desired and achieved social relations. So what is it that someone wants, and what is it that they actually experience? If you're at any other presentations about loneliness, you'll usually find somebody in one of the talks will have a picture something like this. And really what it's trying to get across is you could be surrounded by people but still feel lonely. So it may be that the person has too few social relations, or is lacking the quality or closeness that they are really seeking. So terminology matters. The terms loneliness and social isolation are often used interchangeably. However, they are quite distinct. Loneliness is a very personal experience. It's a subjective, unwelcomed feeling of the lack or loss of companionship or meaningful relationships, emotional or social. Social isolation is objective and focuses on the number of relations, social interactions, social support structures or engagements or activities that one is involved with. So not everyone who is lonely is socially isolated, and not everyone who is socially isolated is lonely. There are different types of loneliness. Social loneliness is the absence of a connection with friends, neighbors, colleagues. Emotional loneliness is the absence of a significant other with whom a close emotional attachment is formed, say a partner, a best friend. Existential loneliness is the sense of longing that cannot be achieved through any type of social interaction. Despite solid relationships, the person still feels empty. I consider there are 4 frequencies of loneliness. Transient, experienced at times of bereavement, retirement, maybe moving home, becoming a carer, maybe going to university. Situational, occurring at certain times of the year or occasions. Maybe the COVID pandemic could be considered an example of situational loneliness. Occasional loneliness is this feeling that comes and goes. It's often thought that it's part of being human and our desire for human connection. And chronic loneliness, here one feels lonely all or most of the time. So that's the first part around definitions. But it's important to recognize that the associations with loneliness and health, and the associations with loneliness and poor health or well-being have been established for over 30 years. Evidence suggests association with depression and anxiety, non-communicable diseases such as cardiovascular disease, health behaviors such as smoking, stress, sleep, cognition, frailty, and premature mortality, with the evidence especially strong for depression. Paradoxically, there's a concern that chronic loneliness can adversely affect one's ability to connect with others and to engage in interventions that could decrease their loneliness. A recent Lancet article underscores the association of loneliness and social isolation with poor health. Traditionally, we view that frail people become lonely. But actually, this research argues that loneliness and social isolation actually increase the risk of developing frailty rather than the other way about. So now I'm going to move to the data part. I'm about halfway through my presentation. It's often said that anyone can feel lonely. However, some groups are more at risk of feeling lonely than others. In this section, I will use data collected in Northern Ireland by NISRA both before and during the pandemic. I'll give a few examples to illustrate that certain groups are at an increased risk of loneliness. So, if everybody can see that slide, loneliness in people aged 16 plus with and without a limiting long-standing illness. If we look at those with a limiting long-standing illness compared to those without, you'll notice that they're more likely to feel often or always lonely compared to those without a limiting long-standing illness, 12% compared to 3%. The social gradient of loneliness is often forgotten in discussions. This data shows that loneliness is related to deprivation and is much higher in the most deprived areas of Northern Ireland. Reporting loneliness, if you look at from the least to the most deprived areas are more likely to report loneliness than the least deprived areas. 8% indicating they feel often always lonely compared to 4% in the least deprived areas. In this slide, we see a gender difference, with loneliness higher in women than in men in Northern Ireland, both pre and during the pandemic. If we look in 2020, 32% of men reported being lonely compared to 42% of women. Loneliness in Northern Ireland by urban-rural areas, 2018 and 2020. The NISRA data indicates loneliness was found to be higher in urban areas rather than rural areas, both before and during the pandemic. So if we look at 2020, we see it's 40% in urban areas compared to 33% in rural areas. Let's look at loneliness by household type. In this slide here, you can see on the left, we're seeing number of persons in the household, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus. So what you observe is that single person households have increased risk of reporting always often lonely, both before and during the pandemic. During the pandemic, the loneliness gap grew between those that live alone and those who live with others. If you notice column 3, always, often, always, in red at the top for one person households, 16% compared to 1% in those 5+ person households. This is a busy slide, but it's important in that it compares loneliness in Northern Ireland in 2018 and 2021. And what you see is that the level of often, always lonely remains similar for some age groups, both before and during the pandemic. But if you look at the age group 16 to 24, you'll see the biggest increase in reporting being lonely some of the time or occasionally, moved from 33% to 42%. So that gives you a taste of some of the data. So I presented descriptive data in the slides to date. So in summary, conclusion, loneliness and the associations with poor health and well-being have been well established for over 30 years. There's no argument in that. Not all groups are at equal risk of experiencing loneliness. That's an important message. You'll often hear people will say, we can all experience loneliness. But what I've tried to show in this data is that actually not all groups are at the equivalent risk of experiencing loneliness. And for me, it's important before people jump to solutions to remember loneliness is very personal, and it's important to understand the type, the frequency, and the cause before we jump to actions. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Roger, thank you very much. And that was really helpful in terms of setting the context, in terms of the frequency and particularly in the Northern Ireland context as well. So, and I think shows, as you say, the importance of really having an understanding of what type of loneliness that you're dealing with and how to respond. So we're going to move to our next presentation. So I'm really pleased to welcome Lorraine Conlon, who's chair of the Department of Health Regional Loneliness Forum, and Darren Strawbridge, who's Professional Social Work Officer at the Department of Health Office of Social Services. And they're going to talk about why the Office of Social Services is interested in loneliness and what they're doing with the Regional Loneliness Forum. So over to yourself, Lorraine and Darren.
Okay, thank you, Mandy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, that's grand. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope Roger's presentation has given you more of an appetite. And since this is a lunchtime seminar for loneliness, and we'll add to that as we go along. I'm not an academic when it comes to loneliness, but certainly since meeting Roger, I've learned a lot more about this subject. Roger has said that not necessarily all groups will indeed encounter loneliness. From our perspective, what we've found out as part of our exploration is loneliness. It's not really something which people choose, and can happen to anyone. But the key thing is, and the big challenge around our kind of the health and well-being is how can it be dealt with? And you as social workers, as social care workers, what I've come to know, holding the kind of regulation policy for social work and social care in Northern Ireland, you're very uniquely placed in that in your roles, you have an opportunity to build relations with service users and their families, unlike many of the other health professionals. So you're very uniquely placed to make, and are probably making a huge contribution around this. Can you bring up the next slide, Darren? Thanks. So I'm not going to go into all the definitions. Roger's taken us through that, but would re-emphasize the whole piece around making connections, which is very important. And no doubt the pandemic, which we have all encountered and experienced, has added to that big challenge for all of us, you know, working from home, working alone. And social workers, you folk will have experienced probably loneliness as part of your job as well, and our social care workforce too. So what have we been doing in the department? Well, what we decided to do was to find out what was happening in our own backyard in terms of health and social work and social care. And through a conversation with Minister Robin Swan, we agreed that we would carry out a survey to see what our trusts and our arm's length body organisations were already doing, and focusing on our key priority, which is health and well-being. The work that we did resulted in a very high level kind of a report. It's caveated that it was done during the pandemic when many of our health and social work and social care folk were at the front line. So it's not totally comprehensive, but it certainly was enough to give us a starting point to move forward and to set up the structures that we've done, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So we also got a small budget agreed by the Minister, and we set up a small team. And Darren, he'll be speaking shortly, is part of that team. And it's great because Darren is a professional social worker, so you know he will speak your language, and very much is informed around the whole loneliness piece related to mental health. Our focus has been as well looking at structures already in place around health and well-being. And we're using the PHA 5 steps to health and well-being really as our framework to initiate initiatives, programs, activities, and also then to fold the envelope back up again and to bring us back to be able to evaluate impacts. And in the medium term, we know that Roger is going to help us a little bit more with that piece in terms of evaluation. Our focus then is around to the kind of larger picture, which is obviously the Programme for Government Indicator, which is to improve the overall health and well-being of the public. Thanks, Darren. I'm going to hand over to Darren for a moment just to take you through some of the high-level stats that has been mentioned. Darren.
Yeah, thanks, Lorraine. So I know that Roger has touched on this in his report, but it's just really important that we take in some of the stats within the department and the Office of Social Services to kind of look at how we were going to kind of the significance of our report in relation to the scoping exercise that we've completed within the Department of Health. So the 2020 NICFA report talks about chronic loneliness affects 1 in 20 people in Northern Ireland. 71% of people in Northern Ireland want the Northern Ireland Assembly to do more to tackle the issue of loneliness. 88% of people in Northern Ireland say loneliness has become a bigger problem since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And the report highlights that being chronically or always lonely is dangerous for both your health and well-being, putting a higher risk of heart disease, dementia, and mental ill health. So this is what we really wanted to focus on, as how we would begin to start in the Department of Health to start to tackle loneliness. And I'll talk a wee bit more about what we've done in relation to that. The Wellbeing Northern Ireland report, Roger's already touched on that, so I'm not going to go into that in great detail. But I think it's important to really highlight that those aged 16 to 24 and those aged 75 plus were significantly more likely to feel lonely than other age categories. Because quite typically we would often perceive older people to be lonely, and it's something that we always know about. But I think it's really important that that's highlighted. And as part of the work that we wanted to do and are doing within the Department of Health is about those intergenerational approaches and how we come at this from an intergenerational perspective. And that's really, really keen. And we're really clear on moving that forward. So I've talked a wee bit about that, and we talked about the Wellbeing report. The Young Minds Survey 2021 was the biggest issue affecting young people mental health during the pandemic, which Roger's talked about. And the NICFA call to action, loneliness in childhood can lead to chronic loneliness in adulthood. So we, as such then, what we did as part of the work within the department, what we've done is we established a loneliness project that had been established before my arrival. Lorraine is part of that. But what we thought was really important, given the information and the research that we had, was to bring on board a student from Queen's University. And she's been with us for about a year. And she's a young person, and she's able to reflect those young person's views as part of the work that we're doing within the Department of Health. And she has done it extremely well. And she is absolutely leading in some of the young people research that we're doing within the department, and how we then look at doing a framework within the department.
Thanks, Darren. In relation to one of those pieces, which is the loneliness experience in childhood leading to potential chronic loneliness in adulthood, I'm not sure if any of you have heard of the book Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. If you haven't read it, be a good summer read. And it was certainly very insightful in terms of bringing to life loneliness and how that impacts on our later life if we experience it in childhood. The story is about a young girl who was a looked after child, or child who was looked after, and how then really in her everyday life everything seems to be fine on the outside, but really what she's suffering from is major loneliness. But she has a good friend and a social worker who really helps and supports her, like many of you do with your service users. So it has a good ending. So yeah, definitely recommend reading that. In terms of what we've done, as Darren said, we've established a forum which I chair, and we've involved each of our trusts. We also have Roger as part of that, which has been amazing. We have our policy leads in the department who lead on EU funding, and as well as that, of course, stars like Mandy and advocates in the likes of other central government departments such as DAERA, Department of the Communities, and other central government departments. And really the aim of that forum is to learn and to share and to raise awareness, because with many policies in the department, many of them can help tackle loneliness going forward. But you know, I guess one of our challenges is that joined up piece. So that's really what we're working on at the moment. So our mantra is there, as we've said, alone we're smart, but together we actually can be brilliant, because Northern Ireland, we're a small community. We are very connected, and we think there's great potential going forward. Our Minister, Robin Swan, has really embraced this, and it's been amazing to work with him on that and get his support. what he did for Mental Health Day. He did a pre-record and referenced loneliness and its impact on health and well-being. He's done a pre-record for Loneliness Week last year. He's been very great advocate of these chatty benches, which are popping up, we're glad to say, all over Northern Ireland. If you haven't been to one, go grab a coffee and sit on the chatty bench. And the kind of piece around that is really to raise awareness of loneliness, so people start to have a conversation and destigmatize it. And in different parts of the country, people are volunteering to sit on the bench and really be there to chat to people who want to have a chat. We've also launched chatty cafes. The first was up in Cullybackey. I'd never been in Cullybackey in all the time I lived in Northern Ireland, so now I've been there in the chatty cafe. And again, the purpose of that is to encourage people to come back out, to get more confident post the pandemic, to go out for a coffee. And also we're working on trying to get more of a social enterprise approach, where people who maybe can't really afford to go and buy, you know, fancy kind of coffees and coffee shop, that that'll actually be sponsored in some way by some other companies or in the community. Minister also has been involved in Home to Hospital volunteers event last year, and did this pre-record for People's Kitchen in Belfast last December, just in the lead up to Christmas. So there's some photos there of the chatty benches and chatty cafes. Other pieces, Darren, we can have the next slide, thanks. Northern Trust has launched their framework. The Minister supported that, and really the structure they have set up is involving the various kind of parts, the loneliness networks, which they've established. There are 4 of those in the Northern Trust area, and the other trusts are now following that kind of benchmark and setting up their own structures to focus activity in their area. Minister, other work he's done was being launched at the Robinson Memorial Hospital, Balmoney, and the new chatty benches up there. And on International Women's Day, I'm delighted to say what Minister, he talked about loneliness there and women's health and well-being in particular, and also encourage people to think about carers. Many carers can suffer loneliness and isolation, major change in their lives. And Minister then led a short campaign for all those present on the day to send a small card to a carer that they've never met, to really recognise the role that they play. So there's lots of other kind of examples and activities that are going on, which I'll not go forward with today. However, we do have many plans in place. We're very keen to hear from all of you who are attending today about your ideas and how we can kind of take this forward. And needless to say, we all need each other, and absolutely social workers, social care workers, you have such a unique role and contribution to make, and we so look forward to working with you, so together is better. So thank you.
Lorraine and Darren, thank you very much for that, because I think it really shows the breadth of what the department is doing, and everything from chatty benches through to the loneliness forum. So, and yeah, just in terms of volunteering and that everybody can play a part in addressing loneliness. And thank you, yes, because obviously we really do want to focus today on the role of social work and social care. Now I know Alison, you're wanting to try and see, no, she's shaking her head no. I think what we'll do with the poll questions, if we can, is we would send them out to you afterwards, because we really are interested in knowing, you know, so we had questions about your level of understanding about loneliness, you know, how easy it would be to have conversations about loneliness, what some of the barriers might be for social workers in terms of addressing loneliness in day-to-day practice. So we'll try and find a way maybe to send those out. We would really appreciate you giving us the feedback, because that will help us know where people are at. So we're going to move on now to our next presenters, and we're going to hear from Tony Lee Watson and Stephen Brown from the Red Cross. So they're going to talk about just one example of a community service targeted at helping reduce loneliness and social isolation. And there are lots of amazing community resources out there that are so important to link with. And hopefully Stephen will maybe give us an update about a current campaign in Northern Ireland to have a loneliness strategy. So if I can hand over to Stephen and Tony Lee.
No problem. Thank you very much. And thank you very, very much for inviting us to speak at today's seminar. We are really grateful for the opportunity, and we're extremely grateful to everyone for attending and taking the time out to join this seminar. So we are from the Red Cross. We work on tackling loneliness at both a service level and a policy level. Tony Lee is going to speak about the absolutely brilliant work that our community connector programs are doing, which is really, really incredible. I'm just going to give a quick overview of the work we're doing at a policy level at the Assembly. And basically at the Northern Ireland Assembly, we campaign for the Assembly to take comprehensive action to tackle loneliness at a national level. Northern Ireland is the only part of the UK which does not have a loneliness strategy in place for the rest of the UK. England, Scotland and Wales has introduced government loneliness strategies within the last 5 years, which provide basic policy frameworks for ensuring that this issue is comprehensively tackled across all ages and background at a national level. So we basically campaign for a cross-departmental, fully funded loneliness strategy for Northern Ireland. Finally, for this to be introduced within the next Assembly mandate. This can include a public awareness campaign to raise awareness of loneliness and also break the stigma of talking about loneliness. Ring-fenced resources for organisations that are working to tackle loneliness. And also long-term funding as well to ensure that programs can be kept on a sustainable level. Within the strategy, I'll also ask for loneliness to be included in the school curriculum for children and young people, and also support to be put in place for students attending university and further education. And also for loneliness to be embedded in the programme for government, which hopefully will be we'll see after this election, and also for digital isolation to be tackled as part of the strategy. So as well as the strategy, we also campaign for loneliness to be included in other policy pieces. So we were really, really pleased that loneliness was reflected in the mental health strategy that was from last year. And we'll basically be kind of campaigning for loneliness to be reflected and included in COVID-19 recovery plans that we'll hopefully be seeing as we emerge from the pandemic. There has been really, really positive work being done over the past few years in terms of this. So the Action Group on Loneliness Policy was formed in 2019. It brings together 10 leading organisations working on this. We provide the secretariat for this, and we've been kind of leading this campaign for a loneliness strategy for Northern Ireland. The all-party group on loneliness was first met in June 2020, which has cross-party representation and has been really, really helpful in terms of driving that need for loneliness action at the Assembly, and also provided a really valuable platform for the incredible work that is being done by many organisations, both statutory and voluntary organisations, in terms of the many incredible ways that loneliness is being tackled in Northern Ireland. And we also had the Action Group on Loneliness Policy election hustings just only 3 weeks ago, with panellists from parties across Northern Ireland, which was attended by 43 people, which is absolutely amazing. We had really, really encouraging discussion around the need for a loneliness strategy to be introduced in the next few years. And overall, the commitment from all of the parties there towards tackling loneliness was really, really encouraging. So those are really positive work being done over the past few years. It's, we're seeing really, really good kind of momentum with all the research, all the work that's been done across Northern Ireland by so many organisations. And so hopefully within the next Assembly mandate, we'll see kind of more action being taken forward to tackle this issue on a long-term basis, because that's ultimately what we're kind of campaigning for. So that's just some of what we do. I will hand over to Tony Lee, who's going to speak about our community connector work.
Hi everyone, and yeah, thanks very much again for letting us come along. So I will just share my screen really quickly, and I will be talking a wee bit about one of the services that the Red Cross runs, well, the service that the Red Cross runs is supposed to address loneliness in the community. So it's our community connecting service. I am the community connector then for the Belfast area. We also have got a community connecting service for Omagh. And these are the kind of areas identified as needing to address loneliness in Northern Ireland primarily. So I suppose our service and the promise of the Red Cross as a general organisation, it's the movement that connects human kindness with human crisis. And I suppose the loneliness, especially during the pandemic and post-pandemic then, was seen as a potential crisis that could then affect, you know, as Roger has very like intelligently put, all of the different things that the different health conditions and things that people can then, if left on their own, can then suffer from and things like that. So we are there as a kind of link to try and address and find those people that we need that support and address those things. So why are we here and what does the kind of community connector service look like? So in Belfast, so I'll speak for the kind of Community Connected Belfast service, we're a service for over 55s within the Belfast area who have identified as experiencing loneliness. The kind of main reasons for referral would be a lot of things such like bereavement, a new diagnosis of health conditions, mental health, post-hospitalisation, and COVID has been a big reason for a lot of the service users who've been referred through to ourselves, just haven't been kind of alone for so long in their homes, and maybe they're isolating as well, and then kind of we've come in to try and address that. So I will just play a quick video just to give you a bit of idea of some of the service users that we work with.
Loneliness is a thief of your time. It robs you of your life.
It's a massive void in my life now. And you know, it's never going to get back to how it was before. It's totally, I'm still in a state of shock, I would think, and lonely.
I mean, I've been able to get out and about more and just do little things that are nice, you know, just start to get my life back again and feel better about myself, yeah.
Within that group, you talk to each other and you empathise. And what I found was that then when I came out of the group and I came back home, it was like a different world, if you like.
So it's just a kind of very quick video to show, and it is very typical, although those aren't our specific service users. That was a video created by service users and a service within the Red Cross, the Community Connecting service. And it is very typical of the service users that we would support. And as I mentioned and was kind of highlighted in that video, bereavement and living alone is a very key reason for people being referred through to the service, which kind of, this is just to give a kind of brief overview so the service was pre-pandemic, it did exist, and then during the pandemic changed kind of how it was working, and then came back last April. So from last April, start of May, to April this year, we've seen 187 referrals. Almost half of our referrals would be 80 plus in age, and actually kind of drawn on what was mentioned earlier, the majority of our referrals are presented as female as well, which is, and we would work a lot with different organisations across Northern Ireland to try and to let them know about the service and to get these referrals in. I mean, something we're trying to address at the minute is why we don't have as many males being referred through, whether that's because people, the kind of topic of loneliness isn't as discussed. So kind of linking in with different things like menshits and things like that to try and kind of address that is something that we're doing at the minute. But this is just to kind of give an idea of how many people we have worked with this year. We are a small team, so it's myself and we have got a support worker, and then volunteers are my heroes. They keep the service running basically, and help out on the service that we run. So eligibility for the service is literally, as mentioned earlier, but 55 plus, and that's just kind of the funding criteria. And within the Belfast Trust area, and then experiencing isolation and loneliness. If there is anyone that kind of knows of anyone within the Omagh area or wants more information on other services or the service in other areas, sorry, please just get in touch. They do have services in those areas too. And so to kind of get down to them, what we actually do on a day-to-day basis on the service. So when someone is referred through, we are a 12-week service, and it's really an intervention to kind of address what it is that someone is experiencing and how we can support them. I like to say it's a very vague service because it's person-centered for the person that is referred through. So really, when they're referred through, we would go and I would go and meet with the person, and we call it support planning and goal setting, but really it's talking just about that person's experience, what they're, what it is they're feeling, what it is they would like to get that we can support them with over those 12 weeks, and what they'd like to get out of the service. We say goal setting, and that's just to give people that empowerment of they're setting their own goals, they're deciding what they would like to do, and we're really just there to facilitate that. And that will look like anything for anyone. As mentioned here, kind of different things that we can do are transport as well to different social groups, and then action planning, and through those weeks it's good to have the goals to remind people of this is how far along you've come, this is this is where you're going with this, and this is what you're doing. So different things. This is very kind of brief overview. Every single person wants something very, very different and what they would like to achieve. So just on the screen is kind of different things that we have done to date. So initially, until July of last year, we were phone call service and kind of remote. So during that time, I organised a big lunch, just a drop big lunch where we would, outside. That has kind of changed now. We do one-to-one in person, and we can now transport people to various groups as well. That because transport can be a major issue, especially for a lot of the service users we would support. So it can be really anything that person would like. That can be walking groups. It can be someone just wants to get back outside. We support people with. We would work with a lot of other organisations, to signpost and also get support for things like technology, if technology would be more suitable to access community connections. The DATS bus services have been, almost everyone gets referred, they would like to be able to use transport. But the biggest thing is working with the multidisciplinary teams and the family and that person, so that they get the whole rounded support. It's not just we come in and then we leave. A big part of it is trying to get as much support around that person so that they can then go on after we've finished working with them, and they're able to identify why they feel how they feel and things that they have done then to address that. It's very, to kind of go into all the different things we do would take all day, because it literally is anything. But things that are coming up, for example, we've got during Mental Health Awareness Week, we're hosting a loneliness event with some other organisations as well, and that's just a drop-in event. But we're also hoping to get walking groups started. We have a cinema group, and we're hoping to get some kind of chatty cafes started as well, and where we'll have someone based there, a volunteer, just to kind of encourage people to chat and things like that as well. But primarily the service is one-to-one. The end goal, again, as I said, will look like whatever that person was hoping, but it is hopefully to reduce their loneliness. And we do ask at the start, we kind of have a loneliness scale, and we would ask them where they feel they are in that scale, and we would ask them that at the end as well, just to see what things you've done to achieve that. We would try and highlight that throughout the process of what they're doing, but really it is up to that. It's empowering that person to recognize what they can do and what things are there for them. And these are just a couple of words used to describe community connecting from service users who are very kind about the service. But I think the biggest thing is just we are a person-centered service. We go in and we let them tell us what they need from us, and we really just try and facilitate that. And we work a lot, as I say, with multidisciplinary teams, but with social work specifically, we would work a lot with social workers. They would refer quite a bit, and it's really important that we are always in communication with them to explain, this is what we've done this week, and maybe this is what they've mentioned that they'd like to do. Is there any way that that we can facilitate this? So it's a lot of just ensuring that it is sustainable for the person. Referring to the service, we have a referral form. It is very basic, and I can send that out as well. So that is I've put my own email address and then the service email address, which is just me in a different platform. But it also helps if I'm ever off, someone else will then cover that. And so it means that you can get us on either, and I am happy to send out referral forms for the service. Thank you very much.
Tony Lee, thank you very much, and Stephen. And I imagine there might be a sudden increase in referrals to Red Cross, but that was really useful both to know about the service, and then Stephen in terms of the update of the loneliness strategy, and it is looking very positive. So, you know, hopefully we'll hear more in the future that we will have a loneliness strategy for Northern Ireland. So say we're not going to do the poll questions, so we're going to move on to the final part of the presentation, and myself and Mairead Harkin, who is our Workforce Development Officer for Digital Learning, we're really just going to share a little bit with you about our current loneliness resource, and Mairead is going to sort of talk through a little bit about what we've got on our Learning Zone as a loneliness resource at the moment, and also then we'll talk about our ambition to develop that resource further into a loneliness resource for social work. So Mairead, do you want to share the first slide for me? And I know there's questions coming into the chat function, and particularly around things like volunteering. So please do keep putting those questions in, and we will have time now at the end for some discussion. There are questions about volunteering and about making referrals, so we'll come back to those at the end. So say I've already introduced myself, and Mairead, can you next slide please? So I suppose this is the crux of today. Why do social workers need to know about loneliness? So the Social Care Council, through conversations with our registrants, were very aware of the growing issue of loneliness even prior to the pandemic. And also we were really aware of the potential of social care workers and social workers to be a positive influence in preventing or reducing loneliness. So we have 6,432 social workers registered with the Social Care Council. So social workers support some of the people whom research shows are most at risk of loneliness. So some of those groups include people experiencing mental ill health, people who have a learning disability, isolated older people, carers, young adults, people from ethnic minority groups, and people experiencing crisis or bereavement. So as a profession, social workers must develop and demonstrate a high level of skills in communication. They have to understand psychology and sociology. They need to be able to critically reflect on issues of social justice, and Roger has talked about the impact in terms of poverty and exclusion on levels of loneliness, and social workers must work in an anti-oppressive way. So this training and our framework of continuous professional development and our standards of conduct and practice really makes social workers a potentially great resource in addressing loneliness amongst higher risk groups. But I suppose social workers need to really understand as much as possible about loneliness and inform themselves, and then really to utilise those skills and practice to the best effect so that we can support people that we work with. And you can see from this slide that's embedded in our standards of practice in terms of, you know, standard of practice 2 is about maintaining an up-to-date knowledge and evidence base, and the standard of practice 3 is about developing social work practice, and then, you know, developing our learning and integrating that learning into our practice. So, you know, we've begun to see loneliness being recognised more as an issue that social care staff and social workers should be addressing. So it's already mentioned loneliness is in the mental health reform, but also the current review of adult social care. And you can see from the slide that within the review of adult social care, there's a recognition really of the importance of prevention and early intervention, and the recognition that those services should recognise and tackle the root causes of social care need. And they actually specify that loneliness and social isolation should be a priority for such services. So that's really, you know, given us a mandate, I think, to think more about how social workers can address loneliness. And within that same review of adult social care, there's, you know, reference again to the role of social work in community development and a much more preventative role. So that really is why we think it's important for social workers to now look at what they can do to contribute to loneliness. And I think what we've heard today and what we've tried to show is that It's not just one, it's not social care workers or social workers or community organisations. It's everybody needs to get involved in order to address it, from volunteers right through. So next slide, please, Mairead. So we're really just going to spend the few moments really just talking through and showing you our current resource. So I just wanted to do a little bit of a timeline in terms of how we've got to where we are. So January 2020, we began to set up a loneliness expert working group. So that really, all our resources, as it says here, are all built through collaboration with our registrants, with service users and carers, and it's co-production using lived experience and user-centered design. So we started to set up that working group, and then our plan really, we had funding from the Department of Health, and our plan was that we were going to deliver, and this sounds almost silly when you say it now, and you know, anyway, what face-to-face Northern Ireland wide meetings, which, you know, how wonderful would that be? And hopefully we'll get back to that. But our plan was that we were going to deliver face-to-face learning for social care workers, and also develop a digital learning resource about loneliness as part of that funding. So March 2020, COVID happened, and we really recognised the urgent need to pull useful resources and information together, particularly for the social care workforce. And we rapidly developed with our working group a shielding, social isolation, staying connected resource. So that was completed and on our learning zone by April 2020. And again, when you think back, you know, the term shielding, people, social care staff, members of the public, we didn't really know what was ahead of us or what that meant. So it was really important to get that information out and to think about, it was obvious that if people were going to be living in isolation, then loneliness would be a major issue that social care workers needed to be aware of and know how to address. So 2022 and where we are now, and in the last year, what we've been doing is a real recognition that we all know more about loneliness. And I'm sure if we'd done our poll question about, do you know anyone who's experienced loneliness, or have you experienced loneliness, probably most of us would say yes. And I think COVID has really brought that home to us all. As we've said before, anyone can experience loneliness. So it's really important that we share those experiences and learning to help recovery and build services that actively seek to prevent loneliness and the associated mental and physical health issues. So we began to redesign and update and expand the content of the resource. And we now have a loneliness and staying connected resource, which was aimed at social care, but also had a lot of relevance to social work. We rolled that out in December 2021 in a small pilot, got great feedback in terms of the content, but I suppose a suggestion that maybe it might be good to split the resource into two, a resource for social care, and then maybe a more detailed one with a lot of research for social workers. So that is where we're at the moment. We are going to be looking at taking some of that information to develop a resource for social workers. So what we're going to do, I'm going to hand over to Mairead, and she's going to talk about the resource as it is at the moment and talk you through that. And then we'll maybe just spend a little bit of time about our ask from you as social workers. So I'm going to hand over to Mairead.
Hello everybody, it's good to hear all the presentations today, and I can highly recommend the Eleanor Oliphant book that Lorraine mentioned. I've read it and it's a most excellent story to read. But as Mandy has said, I'm going to talk you through what we have developed, and I'm also going to show you a little film from one of the animations we've developed to hear directly from service users. So I suppose for those of you maybe are not as familiar with our resources, because a lot of these have been very much aimed at our social care registrants to date, but we are now working towards building more specifically around social work. So all our digital learning resources are freely available from our learning zone with no logins required, so they can be accessed anywhere, anytime, any device. And the aim of this is to provide our registrants with flexible access to a wide range pardon me, digital learning resources to support registrants to discover meaningful content that supports their workflow and continuous learning journeys, and learn at a time and pace that suits them best, engage in positive learning experiences, apply and transfer what they've learned into practice, and most importantly, reflect on their learning and the difference it can make to the people they're supporting or caring for. Which is why the main focus of our learning zone and learning resources and resources like this one is on reasserting the importance of learning and supporting registrants to embed standards into their day-to-day practice, which is why we have built in links to standards relevant to the registrant group and built in authentic real-world scenarios based on real practice issues that we have heard directly from service users, from employers, from registrants, that they have told us about and are encountering day to day. And this is to support their learning journey. And we know from evidence-informed learning design that the use of those real-world scenarios is very effective into helping us develop effective learning experience and supporting that transfer of learning into practice. So the completed reflective questions that we build in can be used to evidence registrants are meeting their standards. They can submit it for their post-registration training and learning, and these could also be used for submissions for the PIP-CAR requirements that social workers can submit to support their CPD. But I'm going to show you a bit more about the resource. So the Loneliness and Staying Connected resource it has developed initially specifically for social care workers and managers to learn about loneliness, its impact on the people they're supporting and how they can contribute to reducing loneliness. But it's also very relevant to social workers and other health and social care professionals. Indeed, all our resources are, because they're open, we do get professionals right across the health and social care sector using our resources because of the value of the content. But see, as the slide shows you here, this is the learning outcomes for this resource. There's 9 there. And as you can see, you know, it's about understanding what loneliness is and being able to recognize loneliness, having an awareness of loneliness and its impact, some of the content that you've already heard today, being aware of the needs of people who are lonely or isolated, being aware of the important and unique role that in particular our social care workers and social workers would have in supporting people to stay connected, understand the importance of communication and how to talk to people to make have those difficult conversations and meaningful conversations, know how to help and reduce the impact, know how to report and raise concerns, because one of the things we're trying to do with our social care resources is equip our social care workers to be able to recognize issues like this and report in so additional help and support can be put in place. And also very importantly, we recognize that our frontline staff need to look after their own self-care and well-being and know how to support themselves. And of course, then the links to our standards. But I'm going to hopefully now, if the technology works, launch the resource. I just hope this all works. Let me know, Alison, if this opens up correctly.
Yes. That's
Okay.
Maria, yeah.
That's good. Something technology has worked today. So this is the resource. This is your menu page of the Loneliness and Staying Connected resource. And there is 5 sections here within the resource that is split up into. So the introduction learning outcomes that you've just heard about. And we have understanding loneliness and its impact here. And this is where you find out a bit more about what is loneliness, how big a problem is loneliness, how the social isolation and loneliness are connected, and the impact on health, and who would be is it more at risk of loneliness. We have a specific section around loneliness and COVID-19 because of the pandemic and how much the loneliness has increased during that time. So we've looked at the role of the social care worker, how to stay safe, what you need to know, how COVID and loneliness is linked, but carers' well-being, mental well-being, COVID-19 carers' homes and supported living, looking at COVID-19 and people who live alone, and a section a bit there on grief and bereavement and communication tips. In our recognizing and responding section, we then look at how to recognize loneliness, how to communicate effectively with people who are lonely and isolated, and why we really emphasize the important role of the social care worker in helping reduce that, and being able to support people to make those connections, including those community groups and services that some of those that you've heard today. We work with the Red Cross in developing this resource as well. And then there's the section on self-care and well-being. And our summary, we always have a summary and feedback section into all our resources. So, and throughout the resource, we have 5 animations in this resource, and these are the voices of service users and their impact on of loneliness. All of them, 4 of them are the actual service users themselves, and 1 is as an actor. And we've used them to create our reflective learning scenarios, and I'm going to show you one of those now. I think it's really invaluable to hear this story. So I launch into the resource. On all the resources, you scroll down and you see the content. As you work your way through, we've developed the content in chunked down forms with lots of images and videos and multimedia to reduce cognitive overload, because we know that makes a good learning experience. So there's lots of information as you go through, and you can click through for more. As you work your way through, here you'll see some of the information around some of the reports and more information in the research. So you can click through to find out more information as you work your way through. But the bit I'm going to go to, because I know we've not a lot of time, and I've asked Alison to put the link to the resource in the chat so you can go in yourselves and have a look at it in more in-depth detail. But what I want to do, we've also some lovely little videos in here from the Tilly group, tell it like it is, you know, about their experience of loneliness. So there's lots of content within, all in the resource. So I'm going to introduce you to Ellen. Ellen is one of the service users that very kindly allowed us to record her telling her story. Ellen is not her real name, that's to maintain her confidentiality. So I'm going to play this and let you listen to Ellen's story. She's 90 years old, she lives at home, and she's supported by domiciliary care workers. So.
My name is Ellen and I am 90 years old. I live alone in a ground floor apartment. I have a son who lives in Northern Ireland but not nearby, and a daughter who lives in America. Both keep in touch over the phone and they visit me when they can. I had a very active social life before lockdown, as I had been referred to a local community organisation because I told my social worker I was feeling lonely and wanted more company. They helped me to get involved in social activities in the community, which included a lunch group, an intergenerational group, and a seniors summer scheme. I was really enjoying all the activities and contact that I was making, and I definitely felt less lonely. But all of this ended abruptly when I was presented with a shielding letter at the beginning of April 2020 and advised that I should not leave my home for 12 weeks. This really affected my mood. I felt anxious and more distressed as time went on. I missed the social contact of others and found that my confidence and mobility started to go down as I wasn't walking around as much. I remember saying to my social worker, I'm 90 and I don't want to spend what little time left to me locked up in my own home.
So that is Ellen's story, and we have used this scenario as part of a reflective learning scenario. So then there's some questions that the learner goes into and they click in and then they get feedback. But we follow it up by a further video, but I'll not play it because I know we're a bit short in time, unless you think I have time to play it, Amanda.
Yeah, it's quite short. Maria, do play that little bit. It's
Only
only a few seconds.
So this is the second half of the scenario after they've worked their way through the questions.
I found the first lockdown period very, very lonely. I didn't need a carer in that first lockdown period, but then I had a bad fall in November 2020 and injured my arm. My confidence was really knocked due to my fall. I was really frightened, walking alone, and I couldn't do the things I managed before. I now have a care package, and the social care workers visit 3 times a day and help me get washed and dressed in the morning, and then call it tea time and back in the evening to help me to bed. Having the social care workers 3 times a day really changed my experience of the second lockdown. In the first lockdown, I felt really lonely at night, but now that I know that someone is going to be coming in, it makes the difference, as the day would be very long without them. I get on better with some of the care staff more than others. It's the ones who take the time to talk to me that I like best. I can always tell the carers who aren't interested in me and those that genuinely care about what they're doing. Those that just run in and plump your dinner down, and those who have a chat, share stories about themselves and have a bit of conversation. One of the carers showed me her photos of her grandchildren at Easter, which I enjoyed. It helped develop the relationships, as it's natural for people to talk about their families. I enjoy the benefit from the company and the chat just as much as the physical help. If I could give advice to carers, it would be a caring carer spends time with people instead of just running in to do something and then running out again. Don't judge older people as if we were all the same. We all have different personalities and likes and dislikes.
So that is Ellen's story, and then in this here we followed up with a reflective question. We asked the users to reflect on the story and, you know, to consider some questions, and these are the questions then we use then to help them evidence their learning. But I'm going to go back to the presentation. See if I can get back to it now. To the next. I'm going to hand over to Mandy, but that's giving you a very quick flavour of what's in the resource and some of the types of scenarios that we have built in to really support that learning journey. I suppose what we're trying to do as part of this discussion today is, as part of the thinking of building a social work specific resource, we'd like to be able to build some types of, you know, scenarios and case studies that would reflect the social work experience, you know, to be built in here. So I suppose what we're asking today is for people to join us and help us develop that resource in the way that we would normally go out and seek help to build any of the resources. So that's my little bit finished for today, and I hope you do go in and look at the resource. There's a lot of content within the resource, and it's all very valuable. And I'm going to hand over to Mandy now.
Thanks very much for that, Mairead. And yes, hopefully that just gave you a quick run through of what's in the resource. And I suppose the feedback was that we have a lot of information in that resource. So we do want to kind of divide it out a bit. And there are statistics, as Mairead was saying, there are references to reports. And then we have the really great service user animations. And also we have social care workers and nursing home manager also who were filmed as part of the resource, and then the wonderful input from Tilly as well. So we're really keen to try and do that with the social work resource. So if you would be willing to get involved, that could be talking about sharing an example of practice. It could be as a service user or carer or someone who has worked closely with social work that you just want to get involved to help us look at it, because what we want as well are realistic resources and resources that do talk about both the opportunities and the challenges. So real life scenarios, and, you know, in terms of looking at what are the barriers sometimes to working in this way and what are the opportunities, because I suppose ultimately, you know, social work is a relationship-based profession, but we're also a profession under pressure. So it's really looking at how best we can improve our practice in a realistic way that people can utilise in order to help the people that we support. So please do, whether it's through putting your name into the chat function or getting in touch with Mairead or Alison or myself about any way that you would like to get involved in looking at this next chunking down of the resource to be for social work. So we have a bit of time. Right, if you want to show, the next slide is just our contact details, but hopefully we have a little bit of time for questions. And I did see some questions coming into the chat as we were talking. So I also just mentioned Kim Gillespie from NISRA, and I know, Kim, you've put some information into the chat function, but Kim has very kindly linked with us in terms of saying that she would get involved with the resource. Great source of information. She's put the link there for getting in touch with NISRA about statistics, about all sorts of important issues for Northern Ireland. So good to link with her. So maybe if we start, is there anyone who'd like to ask a question of any of the presenters, or even just some general points that maybe this afternoon has raised for you? This is a bit where you think, has anyone got any questions? I mean, we can start with some of the ones that were in the chat room. I know, and this maybe might go to Stephen and Tony Lee. I saw there was a question in terms of making referrals to organisations that rely on volunteers and maybe finding that there weren't so many volunteers available. Could you, either of you, maybe respond to that?
Yes, sorry, so was that our own service volunteer?
I think just
wise, or-
generally in terms of, you know, whenever you sort of rely on the goodwill of volunteers, I suppose particularly currently and, you know, post-COVID and during COVID.
Yeah, definitely, I would say. So our own service particularly, and we're all out meeting people all the time, but we have got a waiting list for the service, and we're finding that most voluntary sector organisations that rely heavily on volunteers have quite big waiting lists, because it does rely on, you know, ourselves meeting as many people as we can, but we want to keep the quality of the service as well. So we don't want to be, you know, in and out, as they say. So we try and ring fence 2 hours with that person, especially if we're going to be bringing them somewhere. So we're fighting with a lot of services. They're just waiting lists, and with the best will in the world, they're really trying to get people on, but it is difficult.
Yeah, and so actually someone I think in the chat said they would be quite keen on volunteering at a chatty bench. I think that was aimed at you, Lorraine. So maybe even people here might want to volunteer. Lorraine, how would somebody, have you any idea how somebody would get involved with volunteering for chatty benches and chatty cafes?
Yes, certainly. If they send their kind of details through, Mandy, we can signpost them to each of the leads in our 5 trusts, and they'll be aware of the chatty benches that are springing up. There's also a chatty bench which hasn't been launched yet, so you could be the first to sit on it, just at the main gates into Stormont. And the plan was to get some ministers to launch it just before Perda, but it didn't happen. So you could be the first to sit in a chatty bench, Stormont Estate. So thanks, Mandy.
Very good. Okay. And then a question, and maybe this one would be good for you, Roger, because I see somebody was asking for the loneliness scale. And I know we didn't get into that depth in terms of different types of loneliness scales. And then there was also a question about, you know, trying to prioritize who then does get a service when resources are scarce. But Roger, do you want to maybe mention something about measuring loneliness?
Yeah, there's different scales. So say, for example, on loneliness, the two of the more common ones is the UCLA loneliness scale, and then there's the De Jong scale on loneliness. It includes both emotional and social loneliness. So say, for example, the UCLA scale, that's a very common scale that people use. The challenge with that is that there are no guidelines on cutoff points or what are considered. So different organizations use different cutoff points for levels of loneliness. So I can put in an example of a paper where I describe the cutoff points for levels of loneliness. De Jong is a more European scale. It covers both social and emotional. Maybe for this audience, in terms of social isolation, there's the Lubin Social Index scale. Jim Lubin's a social worker, so that's a scale that may be of particular interest to the group that are here. And then there's a Berkman Index of social isolation as well. So there's 4 different scales. Did you have a second question that you asked me? That was it about prioritization?
I think, yeah, there was a question in the chat function, I think, and maybe you might want to answer it a bit, or Tony Lee as well, in terms of, you know, how you, if resources are limited, how you then prioritize who to work with.
I suppose the message that I'm given is you have to identify the type, the cause, and the frequency before you jump to a solution, and that's, you know, that's understand. So say, for example, the issue about if it's income, it's trying to ensure issues are out. Is the person availing of all the possible income that they can if they're on benefits? And there's actually a challenge that's not often talked about, but if you look at any of the literature on this, it's important to note, is the challenge with many of the interventions around loneliness is that the evidence showing their effectiveness is quite challenging. And that's partly because people jump to solutions before they understand the problem and the need, the very personal need of the individual. So what I think, for me, that's the important thing to think about is, you know, what's the personal need that that individual has, rather than saying, okay, well, here's our resources that we want to allocate. You know, what is it that that person needs? And that, you know, it was really great when Tony Lee was talking about, you know, they really go into trying to understand, so what is the issue behind the issue? That's a really important thing. And I'll just do one more. So on and it's great Kim's here from NISRA. She's able to give further details about the NISRA stats. Some of the work that I do, I go into more kind of detailed analysis. So we looked at the issue of loneliness and social isolation from a global perspective. We were involved in a study that had 20,000 responses from 101 different countries. And what I wanted to find out was, both before the pandemic and during the pandemic, what were the common risk factors for people with loneliness and social isolation? And the two common risk factors that stood out was poor mental health and insufficient finances. So irrespective of where the people were in the world, those were the two most important risk factors that stood out before and during the pandemic. And I think that's an important message for the audience that's here.
Thank you for that. That's a great answer. I see, Michael, you have your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks so much, Roger. That was a really helpful answer, really informed. It's so interesting that you talk about how the correlation between loneliness and mental health. And I wonder how that links into Northern Ireland as a post-trauma society. And whether there were any sort of stats or any further understandings or research out there that can give us a bit more understanding into that.
Michael, it's a great question, and it's really interesting when you look at. So I looked at the response to this question: how often do you feel lonely? We didn't use scales; we just went to this question, and what we did, we looked at Ireland, Northern Ireland, England, and the USA. And you know what was striking about that was actually Northern Ireland had the lowest response to that group, to that question. So that, so that was quite striking, is actually to that question. Now, I didn't go into scales and so forth, but with all the challenges we face in Northern Ireland, one of the things that's really good about living in Northern Ireland is that you're part of communities, you're part of different connections, and it's in the fact that you're only 7 connections away from someone, or is it 5 connections? There's this idea that you'll know somebody who knows somebody that will make a connection. So I think there's some positive things that we might forget about as well, and it's important to emphasize those. So thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can tell by my accent that I'm a blow-in, and that would totally match. I'm from Cambridge in England, and I feel much more connected here in Northern Ireland with the people around me in the community that I'm in. So anecdotally, that does fit.
Yeah, but in terms of your question about the trouble, actually, if you in Tony Lee's video, it was really interesting about the issue about bereavement came up.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the issues that actually doesn't get enough attention, about the issue around bereavement and loss and their relationship to loneliness. Because if you think about the type I was talking about, the social part around bereavement, the emotional part around bereavement, and if you think, so bereavement's a risk factor. Poor health along with bereavement's a risk factor. So you've got poor mental health, you've got these combination factors. So that's why it's important, just to, connect these together.
Mm.
So thanks, Michael, for your question.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see there was a comment as well, and I think maybe somebody's going to agree to get involved with this from one of the multidisciplinary teams, social work groups. And I'm wondering, Darren, because I know you have some previous experience of that, if you maybe want to say anything around social work in those MDT teams and what they've been doing around loneliness.
Yeah, I have to say, I covered some of the new multidisciplinary teams in the GP federations across the region, and I have to say they've really got and started to get behind the whole loneliness drive in Northern Ireland. They're doing some really good stuff, Mandy, as you'll well know, in and around the whole community development piece and the asset development piece within Northern Ireland. There are some excellent projects out there, and that's some of the work that we do and hear about and drive within the Loneliness Forum, the regional forum that we have across the region. And ultimately they're doing some very good stuff moving forward. We have just put forward a load of pilot projects for each of individual health and social care trusts, and we are looking to kind of support and fund some of them local projects at a local level at that frontline primary care GP, because what we're saying is that early intervention and prevention piece and getting people connected really quickly with their local community has really done a lot of really good work for people in relation to it. Also the links in relation to that with mental health as well. I mean that's been discussed here at this point, and that frontline early intervention piece for people suffering from mental health, or those who have already got longer term mental health issues, and it's about how we prevent that ongoing aspect in relation to that. Some of the really good stuff around and contained within the mental health strategy and the 10-year action plan, which we know exists within the department, and the work that's ongoing in relation to that is starting to really take fold. It's really good to see that while there is a number of policies within the department that absolutely capture the whole aspect of loneliness, it's about how we further develop those and how we start to connect those across the wider political spectrum. So very keen to kind of start to see how that starts to develop in line with the work that we're currently doing within the department and our wider stakeholders like Roger and the Lorraine's obviously working with me and all the other stuff, and all the other stakeholders as well too, all our arm's length bodies. And as you know, Mandy, this is one of the reasons why we've connected so well with yourselves in NISC, and we will continue to do that. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. So I'm conscious of our time, Alison, and any last questions or anything maybe that I've missed from the questions in the chat function just before we bring things to a close. Alison, you're on mute.
A last week question there from Julie. Do you see it, Mandy?
No.
About specific resources and initiatives to address social isolation and loneliness for people who are asylum seekers and refugees. And Julie works in West Belfast.
Yes, I mean, there will be. I don't know them offhand. I think, as Darren has said, you know, there's such a rich range of community resources. I can certainly link it in with some information about those. But and I think that is one of the challenges really for social work in the area that you work in and the people that you meet is finding out about what's available in the community, what's available more regionally. And there's such a diverse range of community organisations and initiatives going on within the trusts as well in terms of, you know, reaching out to people from specific groups. So I certainly can have a look at that, and I'll forward on some information. And see, Tony Lee has said the Red Cross Refugee Services as well. So I'll forward you on some links. It's good to link in with people like NICFA and Volunteer NI as well in terms of some resources that they would know about.
Randy, can I say just before you sign off, and Alex Larson's on the call today, and Alex is obviously has one of the MDD teams, and we talked a lot about social prescribing around all of this. But also I know Yvonne Carson in Northern Trust and the great work they've set up there. They're very much taking this community approach. I think one of the big challenges, and people raised it today, is actually knowing what's available. And the thing is, what we know, Darren and I and Yvonne, our loneliness team, we've discovered there's so much. But for you as a social worker, you know, you're under a lot of pressure, and yeah, the storm, COVID and all of that. How can you actually know the whole wide range of things that are available? Northern Trust, what they have done is they have actually launched like a database that people can go in then and look to see what's available. It's a challenge keeping something like that up to date, but it's a really, really good start. And I know across the different kind of organisations who've been involved in exploring loneliness over the last few years, that's kind of one of the ideas, is could we have one big central resource that can be tapped into and kept up to date? The community navigator piece, and kind of have experts on the ground within the communities who can keep up to date with what's available, and things will emerge, obviously, new ideas, initiatives, programs, activities. So that's really just some thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Alison, I'm conscious of time. We're at 1:30 now. On the dot. What's that?
That's very well done, considering we had our technical hitch. So I suppose really it's just really then to say thank you to everybody for attending today, and thank you to our speakers. We have recorded the session and we will make it available on our website, but we will send you the link when it is edited and available. So thank you all again for attending, and please feel free, if you have questions, email us and we'll get a response to you. Thank you.